Hello, everybody. Stephen Mead here with Domicile Real Estate, and wanted to go over another Southern California housing market update. This week is particularly interesting for two reasons. One is just kind of seeing what direction things are going. And, I'm one of those people where a lot of times I get kind of a crazy idea, like I see something in the numbers and it just makes me think of something else. And I got curious and I decide to run some numbers on something tangential. I think this is very important. I'm not clickbaiting you. If I were to ask if I were to ask 10 people in Southern California a question about real estate, and that question is, do you think houses are more or less affordable than they were 2 years ago? So June of 2018, I bet at least 9 of those people would get the answer wrong, and probably all 10, and I'm going to show you why. Whenever I see sort of numbers jumping, I think one of the narratives, right? Whenever we see house prices moving in a positive direction, especially in kind of a little bit of a time that maybe seems uncertain, there's kind of always this backlash where people say, well, they can't go any higher, right? That's always sort of the response when housing prices jump, is they can't possibly go higher, and we should really be looking to that. And I was kind of curious, well, relative to the past, just exactly how high are they? So I've got a new graph for you, something that we put together, and I'm going to talk about the data here. But before I do that, I'm going to use a little bit of an analogy. I think a lot of people have a blind spot in their analysis of things, and that is we often confuse the price of something with the cost of something, right? So a really good example of this, and please forgive me if you are not a car guy or a car gal or a car person, and you don't get the reference. But a friend of mine recently bought sort of a modern classic car. He spent $250,000. He's very fortunate financially. And we were having a discussion, and I came to the somewhat awful conclusion that over the next 10 years, I will probably spend as much to own my significantly less expensive vehicle than he is for his special exotic vehicle. And the reason is pretty simple. He spent $250,000 on that car. I do not think it will drop in value at all. In fact, I think it will go up in value after 10 years. I would not be surprised if it is worth $300,000 or $350,000. In the meantime, he gets to drive it, and all he has to do is pay interest on his loan and maintain it, right? And the reason why I'm using this example in particular, right, is because there's a lot of similarities with houses, right? When we talk about the cost of something, we often confuse the price. So in his case, his price is significantly higher than mine, but his cost of ownership is not. And I think there's a corollary in the housing world. Let me jump into the graph and I will explain for you. So let me bring this up here. So here we go. We've got something new, and let me tell you what we are looking at. So this is the payment on a median priced home. And let me get out my little pointer here, which you guys are all used to seeing. And if we go down here, this is Orange County homes, single family and condos. So this is what we did. Down in this bottom line here, we've got months. So we have June of 2018, July, August, et cetera, all the way through May of 2020. And then I also did this past week right here. And what we did is we took the median price of single families and condos. We came up with a payment based on 20% down using prevailing interest rates of the time period. And then to make life simpler and to sort of illustrate my point, I could put all these payments up here, but that would be kind of a stupid looking graph because if you have a different down payment, that may not mean anything to you. So instead I said, you know what, let's say that June of 2018 is a baseline. So we'll call that 100%. And then we will look over time. What do we have? So if we are reading this graph, basically in June of 2018, we'll call that our baseline of 100%. If we fast forward to now, the payment on a median priced home, which has gone up, by the way, since 2018, at prevailing interest rates is 90% of what it was in 2018. So it has dropped 10%. And so there's a lot of interesting implications of this. Number one, it means that if you feel like things are more expensive, they actually aren't. And you're confusing price with cost, right? and the total cost of owning a median priced house has actually gone down by 10% over the past 2 years. The other thing that I draw as a conclusion from this graph is what I said originally when we started this. Whenever we see prices rising, especially in a time when it seems a little surprising, like right now in the midst of a pandemic and double-digit unemployment, we often think, well, they simply can't go any higher. And I'm telling you, if interest rates were to hold steady, so I'm putting a huge if on this, if interest rates were to hold steady, prices could go up by 10% and we would only be equaling the payment level. Now, I'm going to put this in some real numbers for you because I think it's important. I'm going to come back on here so you can see my face when I'm saying this. I don't want people to get caught up too much on the graph. If the median price of single families and condos and everything else in Orange County, you know, let's say that price is, and depending on how you calculate it, these numbers can be a little bit different, but let's say that number is about $750,000. If that number can grow by 10%, that means median prices could go to $825, and we still would be at a payment level that is equal to where it was 2 years ago. Obviously, guys, this is humongous as an implication for what does the future bring. It means I think there is room in this market to move upward. I don't think we're going to get some sort of hard affordability ceiling. Now, if you're a first-time home buyer, this is actually really good news because in your whole mind, you might have been thinking for the past 2 years that houses are getting more expensive, but guess what? They are not. And I think when people give out that advice and they say things like, interest rates are really low, you should buy a house, that sounds very vague, but now we can actually put that into context. What does that really mean? It means that you can buy basically a very similar house that you could 2 years ago, but your payment is going to be 10% less today than it would have been had you bought in 2018 around the same time period. So just thought I'd throw this in there. It was kind of an interesting little bit of analysis we did. You know, a lot of people in my office were very surprised by this. I had a hint this is how it was going to turn out, but I didn't know what the actual numbers were. And, you know, when I get curious, I make graphs. Let me go back to kind of sort of our normal thing. I've added some other new elements this week as well. So if we go in here and we look at our new listings, guess what? Under 1 million, we have seen again, get out my little pointer. We have again seen a rise week over week, and we've seen this pretty much, we hit a bottom really, and then we've been rising on the number of new listings ever since. Our market has been growing. We are still lagging our level of listings from pre-stay at home in our under $1 million category. And again, just as a reminder for everyone, we are talking about the Southern California housing market in these graphs. And for the purposes of our analysis, we are using data from Los Angeles and Orange counties together in these graphs. So this is our total new listings under 1 million. If we look at our $1 to $2 million category, it's staying pretty flat. I mean, there's some minor changes, but not really a huge change. One thing that I did is that I added this week is I wanted to do some more comparisons over versus 2019. So you're looking at here's in 2019. In the same week, we had 2,044 new listings hit the market, 1,736 here. We're down 300. That's about a 15% drop of where we were last year, just to give you guys a point of reference. Now, I'm going to go back to away from the graph here. Just a reminder, new listings, this is our supply side. This is what we're talking about when we say the supply end of the market. Moving on, I'm now going to show, and we're going to shift, and we're going to show you demand, which is buyers, and what are buyers doing. Now, if we look at new escrows, right, these are contracts that were signed in the last week. This meant a buyer and a seller came to an agreement. This is the freshest data you will find anywhere. And wow, you know, this data tells a little bit of a different story. And I think it's really important to kind of talk about that different story here for a minute. You know, we've been above our pre-stay-at-home order numbers for the past 3 weeks, but we took another jump in these new escrows here. I mean, just this is really sort of moving, big movements. And the same thing happened in our $1 to $2 million price range. Buyers are out there. If I go ahead and I show you too, if we go back to sort of our new escrows versus last year, Well, this is really interesting news, right? We had 1,641 new escrows the same week last year in 2019. This week, 1,589. We were not down by that much. We were down by about 4 percentage points. Um, I can't really express why this is such a big deal. One of the things that people have been talking about and they're obsessing about is this number of closed sales. And if you watch any of my videos, you know the problem with closed data is it is old. It is stale data. In a market that moves this quickly, I do not want to know what the market was like 30 to 45 days ago. That's almost meaningless information to me. I've already figured out what happened 30 to 45 days ago. But when you look at these new escrows, this is telling me what sales are going to be in 30 to 45 days. And when I compare them to last year, they are only down by 4 percentage points. And let me make another little comment here that I think I don't want people to miss sort of an even bigger point. When we started this pandemic, you know, myself included, I'll tell you what the narration was in the market and in the industry. Everybody thought we were going to see this situation where, you know, sellers still needed to sell and those listings were going to sort of languish and build up on the market, and days on market was going to go up and prices were going to go down and the buyers are going to be scared, nowhere to be seen. Well, guess what? In fact, we're seeing a little bit of the opposite. We're seeing the buyers have almost completely back to normal. It is the sellers that are taking a little bit more time to kind of come back into the market. And I'm going to go to our next graph, but you probably already have an idea of what's happening. If we see that the number of new listings is going up, but slowly, and the number of new escrows or buyers coming into the market is going up really fast, what is that going to do for our supply and demand relationship? Let's cut to the graph. You already know what's going to happen, but I think the number is especially fun to illustrate here. And that is, oh boy, look at our absorption rate. If we are, and let me get back my pointer, you know, we were down here with a pretty healthy absorption rate in the mid 70s or into low 70s. It dropped as expected. It started going back up. But boy, look at where we are now. And, you know, I don't have the number noted on here, but I can tell you from putting the data in and calculating it, we are at a 91% absorption rate. That basically means we are burning through old inventory at this point. I mean, we are, you know, not every home that comes on the market is a serious seller, right? Like we all know this, houses that show up overpriced. So that means not only are buyers snapping up pretty much everything that's a serious seller, they're now going back to those listings that have been sitting on the market for a long time. I would say at this point, you know, we started talking about this last couple of weeks that it was starting to look like a seller's market. This is 100% completely a seller's market, especially in this under $1 million category for Los Angeles and LA counties. And even if we go to this $1 to $2 million market, we are seeing very strong numbers. We are significantly above where we were pre-stay-at-home on these absorption numbers. You know, if you are a seller, again, I can't tell you where the market's going to be in 3 months, but I can certainly tell you where it is right now. And right now is a very good time to sell your house. It's also a really good time to buy your next house because you're going to get a great deal on the interest rate. So if we're looking at the supply-demand relationship, this is wildly strong evidence that we are in a huge seller's market. And, you know, buyers, I think now is not the time to be picky about price or to be going in and lowballing people. You will not win the listing on most of these if that is your strategy. Moving on to our average pending list price, we made a little bit of a change this week to make our graph a little bit more visible. We've got our prices noted in here because I think it's interesting. And, you know, if we're telling our overall story here for under $1 million, when I say average pending list price, by the way, our system does not release prices of houses that are in escrow. We only find out the prices when they sell. So what we're using is that listing price of those new escrows is kind of a guide point, right? Like it's not a great absolute number, but it's a good relative number from week to track because we can see the direction prices are going. We started off here around 612, things dropped a little bit, people were freaked out, and then boom, all of a sudden we saw things start to rise. It hasn't been a perfect rise, but it's been going. And now we are at 626. And I think the reason why this is important, you know, this is about $14,000 or over 2% higher over 3 months. If we were to extrapolate that out for the year, that is an 8% growth point annualized. Do I think we're going to hit that? Probably not. But hey, our affordability numbers say we've definitely got room in people's payments to make that happen. So, anything can happen. I think a lot of experts are not pointing to those kind of increases this year, but looking at this affordability data and looking at how fast we're moving in this market, I'm going to say, to me, it feels like a possibility. I wouldn't say it's something that's impossible to happen. And I think that's really, you know, I say this a lot. I don't want to give you predictions on where I think the market is going to go, but I can definitely tell you about what things I think are possible, what things I think are unlikely to happen. I think a large scale price drop at this point is unlikely. I've been saying that for a while because the data just doesn't seem to show that. The affordability data certainly does not. However, I'm going to give you a couple caveats because I think it's really important to understand. And I hope one of the things that this year has shown is how much sort of these unexpected events can drastically change our outlook and our picture of the market. A lot of our data is based on interest rates remaining where they are. If inflation starts to happen, and by the way, folks, we've issued a ton of government debt in the last 6 months. If interest rates start to rise and we see inflation rear its head, that sort of changes this market dynamic a lot. That means that affordability analysis, all of a sudden, those numbers, instead of us dropping away from where we were in 2018, we're going to start heading back up towards that number, even without price changes. So, just be careful and watch these other figures. Don't get so fixated on one statistic that you're sort of missing the bigger picture, because economics is really about the big picture and understanding that. And sometimes when we zoom in too close, we sort of miss some of these factors that might be happening around us that can have a profound effect. Moving on, I want to go to our analysis also of pricing in the above 1 million in our $1 to $2 million category. That's really remained pretty flat. We're not seeing the same kind of growth rate of that. Part of that is because this market just doesn't have nearly as many sales. So sometimes we get a little bit more week-to-week variance than we would like. Our days on market for new escrows. So again, we've seen that number. Let me get out our pointer. We've seen that number for our under 1 million category really hold pretty steady the whole time. I don't see a lot of change. I do think that sort of if this little trend continues with this really high absorption rate, I do think days on market on average is going to have to start falling. I think we're going to start seeing that happen. I just don't know whether that's going to be next week or the week after. In our over 1 million, our $1 to $2 million category, that number is falling. I mean, anytime we have days on market under 2 months, I mean, that really is indicative of an inventory constrained market. I mean, and we're pretty much remaining under that in both of these price categories. Let me give you guys some final thoughts about what's kind of going on and maybe how this affects your strategy. I think for people that were thinking about waiting, here's the danger of waiting. I think if you wait to buy, you could end up in sort of a double whammy situation, right? Interest rates start to move up, and what we see whenever that happens, right? There's an interesting trend historically we've seen. When we see a bump in interest rates, you think that the immediate response would be to escrows to go down. They don't. People who are waiting on the sidelines get panicked that they're going to be knocked out of affordability. And what does that do to prices? It actually bumps them up even further. So I think if you're in a position right now thinking that you want to wait, I see a lot of, is it possible prices are going to ease? Maybe. I won't say that's impossible, but I think the more likely outcome is that they will not ease and that interest rates might go up, and you might end up in sort of this double whammy where you get hit from both sides on that, which is not fun. Now, if you are a seller, what do you think about this? Well, again, I can't tell you where the market's going to be in 3 months, right? And as a seller, I think one of the things you want, especially if you're moving to another house, is you want to have as much control over your situation as you possibly can. Right now, the great news is you can very much control selling your house. You're not going to be stuck in the market for a long time for most houses if they're priced appropriately. So you're in a situation where you can kind of dictate a little bit how this process is going to go. And I think there's a huge amount of value in that, especially if you're a seller who is selling, even if you're not immediately moving to another house, but if you're selling in order to buy another house in the Southern California market. Anyhow, that's pretty much it for this week. If you have questions, comments, We love to hear about them. We love to see them. We love to answer them. Obviously, we are here for you. Once again, I'm Stephen Mead with Domicile Real Estate for people who love houses. And we will see you again next week.